Laurie, as many of you know, is a former journalist for Fortune magazine. It's pretty impressive. She's also an OG. She was one of the first journalists on the web. Laurie was editor-in-chief of the path-breaking network of sites known as women.com. Laurie has now moved over to the public relations side. She works with leaders on their thought leadership and content marketing and their visibility. And you could say her first love is Twitter. Please welcome Laurie.
Hey, everyone. Thank you, Robbie. And thank you, everyone. I'm so honored to see you here.
I'm just sort of curious, who's the book for? I mean, we saw that there's some people that are on Twitter. Some people have never heard of Twitter. Some people don't know what the @ symbol even looks like. I mean, we take all kinds. Who would benefit the most by reading this book?
I tried to address it in the subtitle, which is how to amplify your brand on Twitter. That appeals to a lot of people, marketing people, certainly salespeople, independent consultants. A bunch of CEOs have really gravitated towards Twitter. Entrepreneurs, especially authors. I think authors, hands down, need to be on Twitter. I work with a lot of different people, executive coaches, and so forth. And I do kind of keep an eye out for tech leaders whom I can help shine on Twitter and in other mediums.
Yeah, so we will underscore tech leaders as like the folks you're primarily reaching out to, but authors will definitely benefit from this, coaches, consultants, speakers, anyone who's trying to amplify their brand and they want to use Twitter as that platform. Now, I joined Twitter a long time ago, got really excited about it, and now it's sort of fallen a little bit off my radar. And it's exciting to actually have this be brought back to my attention because I feel like I've been a little ho-hum about it, and there's a lot of new tools that have come out and, you know, bright, shiny object. But if it works, why not use it, right? But there are some myths about Twitter that I think we need to kind of do some myth busting. There are 3 I know you mentioned in your book. So what are those 3 myths that we should keep an eye on?
Well, I tackle 3 up front right there in chapter 1. And I say, good news, myth 1 is you need to have a huge following to make an impact. And fortunately, that's not true. You just need to be reaching the right people. And it could be, you know, it could be the right 50 or 100 people. So you do not need a huge following. That's a myth. Another myth is that that you need to be a young hipster who's fluent in memes. And thank God that's not true for Twitter. And myth 3, this is the biggest myth that business people fall into believing. And some people think to save time, you could just automate everything. And that's a big mistake in my view, because one of the advantages of Twitter is there's real people out there, not just bots, it's real people, and you can interact with them, and it's very much appreciated. So if you are going to automate, you know, in the interest of time, you definitely want to make time to also interact. And I want to add that even people from the broadcast news era, Dan Rather and Katie Couric, even they go on Twitter and they're actually interacting with people. So should you. It's why it's called social media.
That's why it's social, folks. You know, I think it's a difference between a bulletin board and a message board. A bulletin board is where you would just post your flyer about your upcoming event, and a message board is where you would have conversations about who's bringing what, you know, who wants to come, what's the dress code. You have a conversation about all that. And I really think Twitter is more of that interaction. So even if you're scheduling for convenience, make sure you're checking your @, your replies to see what people are saying, and in a timely manner, you know, interact with people so they don't think you're just ignoring them. Now, you also in your book talk about some truths that are not myths, but may need to be underscored nevertheless.
Yeah. So again, right in chapter 1, the truth 1 is Twitter is not a silver bullet for all your marketing, which is a bummer. Wouldn't it be great if one tool could do it all? So it's not a silver bullet. But as I say, is any one thing a silver bullet? Number 2, truth 2, Twitter will take some time. So I say, you know, well, let's get started, you know? And truth 3, I added just at the last moment when Elon Musk hit the news back in April. And the truth 3 is it might change a lot with a new owner. He's, you know, a real wild card. And I say could be, but that's all the more reason to dive in and see what the buzz is about.
Yeah, I'm going to just bring myself back in here. I mean, that piece about it could take a while. I mean, the long game, you and I know each other through Dora Clark, and that's her latest book is The Long Game. It feels like if you don't get started today, that, 30 days from now, 90 days from now, a year from now, like you need to kind of get started at some point. What are some of those early metrics that you're kind of, it's working? Is it that people are interacting with you? Is it you're getting a certain number of followers? Is it you figured out how to craft the perfect tweet, if there's such a thing? Like, how would you know in the first few months that, yeah, I'm using Twitter. This is super exciting.
Well, everyone, this is a question that Robbie's just thrown at me live. So and it is always so humbling as a person who's been a journalist to now be on the PR side. It's so much harder to answer questions than be asking. Asking's, in my book, so much easier. Well, that's like just a huge, huge topic. So I guess I might say just, buy the darn book and we can have a debate. But early on, I tell people, do not worry about your follower count, because unless you're already super famous, your follower count is going to be disappointingly very, very low in the beginning. So you're really going to start trying to build up a network. And I'll be talking more about that, I think, soon. And in the book, I have a whole chapter about building your community, because it's really essential to that interactive message board you just described.
Yeah, I really love that section about building and finding your community, because that's one of the things I experience on Twitter, is that there are sort of sub audiences, or it's like there's Black Twitter, there's the activist Twitter, and then within that there's subgroups for that as well. And I think when you first join, you don't know that.
Right. There's historian Twitter. They call themselves Twitter storians. There's the scientists, love Twitter. And I started a list to keep track of. We have a family member who's a doctor, a PhD in evolutionary biology. And I started a list of evolutionary biology and science people on Twitter. And it's got more than 50 followers who are very interested in following each other.
So there's a way to make a list of profiles. Is that what you did for this?
Right. But maybe we'll get to that later in the
Yeah. So we'll pin that question. What is your overall philosophy around creating content, though? Because it sounds like Twitter is part of that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Thank you, Rob. Well, first of all, I want to shine the spotlight on my friend Andy, who's on this call. Andy wrote a book. She didn't know I was going to do this. It's called Get to Aha, Discover Your Positioning DNA and Dominate Your Competition. And positioning, before we get to my philosophy, there's this pre-step, which is some call positioning, where you kind of need to know who you are and who you're competing against, right, Andy? So you got to kind of figure that out, or at least have just a pretty good idea. And then we can talk. And I tackle this, actually, it was nicely surprised, like, oh yeah, I put this on page 1. My philosophy is, once you kind of know who you are, then I call it CAB, create, amplify, build, like a cab that gets you from here to there. And create is where, to me, that's the hard work. Like, Robbie, you have a blog, you have a podcast. And many people write books. And the point is, that's a lot of work. That's creating content. And then you can use Twitter, and my book is all about how to amplify, using Twitter. So there's the amplification, and then there's building your network. And it's sort of this continuous cycle: create, amplify, build, and keep building. Oh, and I should add, it's been suggested that I let people know that Twitter can be easy. Like, you literally can. When you're amplifying, it doesn't need to take all day and all night, because you might have actual business to run. You might not be as enamored of Twitter as some of us are. And I'll be interviewing some people after Robbie interviews me who use Twitter and are in my book. But you can get it down to 15 minutes or less a day. And I give you permission if you want it. You could just get on Twitter 2 or 3 times a week for that book that's coming out next year, to start laying the groundwork.
That is a great example of, if you're going to want to market a book or launch a podcast, to start talking to people now and really building the following, the audience sooner rather than later, and also maybe even get ideas for content, for guests, for topics to cover, to build all that in now. To that end, like one of the ways I know that's really great to sort of build, I don't know, karma points. You actually, in your book, I grabbed a little screenshot of this because I thought it was so clever. You say, good karma, retweet, don't just like. So when you're thinking about that, like, why is that the important thing? I think too often, we just kind of can scroll through liking things. How is the retweeting making a difference, and why is it something we should be focusing on?
Yeah, well, retweet, for those not using Twitter a lot yet, retweet is really just a fancy way of saying sharing. And any social media, this is true on LinkedIn and Facebook, because they all copy each other. They all see what the other guy's doing. Instagram. So in general, you've all seen on Facebook, someone posts something and you can like it. And on Twitter, you can like something. You click on the heart. And it's very nice, but it's really pretty minimal, okay? So it doesn't really do much for the other person. Now, it serves a purpose. It can be sort of like your own personal bookmark. You can go back and look at what you've liked, and then maybe, and sometimes late at night, I'll like some stuff that I might want to tweet about the next day. So liking has its purpose, but it's far more helpful, kind, builds goodwill if you retweet when you see something that someone says that resonates with you. So I want to talk just really briefly about this. And when you retweet, you're following me, so we're sharing someone else's content. I know, Robbie, you get this, but everyone else might not. When you retweet, Twitter gives you now two options. And if you're in a hurry, I say just hit the retweet button, and it's a continuous arrow. But if you want to, and Rich Schwerin, whom I'll be talking to very soon, Rich is in my book. He's a very generous retweeter, and he doesn't just hit retweet. He'll usually comment. He'll quote the thing that you're retweeting, or he'll put in 2 cents of his own. And if you have something to say, that can be smart too. So I'm saying retweet. And I really felt when I started to write the book, if people remember one thing, I'm trying to get the retweeting out into the world. I just want more people doing that, because it's a nice thing to do. And I say it builds good karma. So throughout the book, I say this several times. I want people to know, I want you to retweet.
It's like if you forward an email to somebody, like I got your email and I forwarded it to a friend, you would never know I did that. Right.
Correct.
So if there's a way to sort of tag you, which is what this is doing, it notifies you that this is happening, which sort of builds up rapport between you and I, and it creates better visibility for that tweet so people see it. So
right.
It's helping create amplify, build, right? So that's the amplify piece of it. We have a lot more content. Oh, Laurie, go ahead.
Right. I want to give one caveat about retweeting. So suppose your good friend, so you feel a little bit of social obligation, your good friend posts something and asks you to retweet. But let's suppose, for the sake of my example here, let's suppose it's something you do not agree with. Like, suppose a colleague of yours says, I just loved walking on hot coals at the company retreat last week, and everyone should do this. But let's suppose that you've heard that this is not actually a good thing to do and could be dangerous. So you philosophically disagree. I urge you, do not retweet that, because someone else could just assume, they could come along and assume like, oh, you retweeted that, you're kind of implicitly endorsing it. So I tell you to be choosy in what you retweet. You don't have to retweet everything, even if I ask you, or Robbie, or anyone asks you. So, do what works for you and your brand.
Before I forget, I want to actually do a quick photo. So this is your warning to take a moment and, find your browser, find the window, look above it. There's this little circle. That's your camera. I know, 2 years in. So if we were in person, I'd be telling you to get closer together and put your drinks down. But, stay in your 6-foot bubble and sit up a little straighter. and look for that camera. And then I'm going to just set this up so we can take a nice little photo of everybody who's here. If you don't have your camera on, that's totally cool. If you don't want to be in the photo, this is your out. Welcome. More people just turn their cameras on. I love that. Thank you, Elaine and Gary. All right, so we're going to count down here and do a little 3, 2, 1. You know what to do when I say cheese. 3, 2, 1, cheese. Fantastic. I hope no one blinked. We will continue with the show. Fantastic. I'm glad you're all playing along. Hey, Laurie, we want to bring up your first guest here. Who do we have?
Thank you, Robbie. I want to bring up Amy-Willard Cross. She's our neighbor to the north up in Toronto, near Toronto. So I'm going to interview a couple guests. They're all quoted in my book. That fun fact about the Twitter hashtag user, that's in the book also. And I list Andy's book. If you're wondering what was that positioning book, that's in here too, and as well as a book by Dory Clark that, and she's the person who connected Robbie and me. Anyway, Amy, you have knocked down barriers for women in several spheres as an entrepreneur. And tell us, how do you like to use Twitter to promote yourself and your business and meet people?
All right. So my first thing I want to say about Twitter, to me, it's like a big party. That's what I love about it. And you do business at a party, you make friends at a party, you know, have romances at a party. That's what Twitter is for me. And sometimes Twitter, you can find the really smart people on Twitter. And my best Twitter moment is when I first launched the Gender Fair Index in 2016 or something. I was retweeted by Ariana, and that was like, hooray. And also Chelsea Clinton. And I can't tell you that I actually see a lift in the number of downloads we had.
And we briefly explain Gender Fair.
Well, I'm not selling. What am I talking? I'm just selling gender equality. I'm a former journalist, as Laurie is, and instead of just writing about all the problems, I wanted to do some sort of solution-oriented journalism. So I do a data journalism business called Gender Fair, and we rate publicly facing consumer companies on their gender metrics. So for like fair trade or cruelty-free, I can tell you which businesses are good to women and which ones aren't. About 88% of them do very badly on these metrics that are based on the UN's women empowerment principles. Anyway, so I'm out there on Twitter with a lot of feminists. I follow a lot of mainly women, but I've done things like I've done research on Twitter. I've asked for the business and for myself personally. I can ask companies questions and they'll answer them. I can talk to people. I talk to people whom I need to meet in the advocacy world, and then we have conversations offline. What else do? And I also, as Laurie does, I use Twitter for lists. So as a journalist, I love my lists of like certain kinds of communities I want to reach. And I'm not really in a broadcast mode at the moment, Laurie, because I'm not really focusing at the moment on building our consumer following, or rather the army of women consumers. I want to create a revolution against all these bad companies. But I have lists for that when the time comes that I'm ready to sort of say, do this. But also the other thing I find about Twitter is that just as with a party, you don't go up to people and say, here, show them a sign or hand them a tin cup. You have relationships. And when sometimes I will send a blind tweet to someone, a blind DM or something, and rarely does it actually do anything because it's an ask or a question and they haven't agreed to connect with you. So I think that would be what I've noticed works for me. Just I start talking to people about other things. I've been asked to be on boards of things from Twitter. Like it is a party where you can meet people who have similar interests. And is that the right kind of answer to that question, Laurie, or should I go on?
A+.
Yay! I love school. I miss school.
Thank you, Amy. So now I'm going to call up here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm going to call up Dennis Shiao. And Dennis has a wonderful following, more than 14,000 Twitter followers last I checked. And here's a little brief intro before I turn over the mic and ask you a question. Dennis started a local meetup, meetups, and his eventually became known as Bay Area Content Meetup. And guess what? During the pandemic, he went global. So now he's attracting a global audience. It's really phenomenal. And Dennis is also now an independent marketing consultant. So Dennis, and I know Robbie's putting up people's Twitter handles. Thank you, Robbie. So Dennis, you're now an independent marketing consultant with your own agency. Tell people, please, how you mainly use Twitter. Don't forget the dad jokes.
Sure. Let me just, I will answer the question, but a couple things real quick. I have a Twitter claim to fame, which is that at one time, Sir Richard Branson, whom most of you know is a founder of the Virgin Group, followed me. And at the time he followed a couple thousand people, and he has millions of followers. Now, I happen to think it was a mistake that he followed me, but I used to screenshot it and show everyone, like, Sir Richard Branson is following me. Like a couple years ago, he unfollowed me because I went to like double check, but I don't know how it happened, but I think it was kind of random that he followed me. Anyway, before I talk a little bit about Twitter, there's a very interesting connection to Laurie and Twitter and the meetup that she mentioned. And the connection is that Laurie is just a great connector. I think those of you who know Laurie know that she just loves to connect people. And I think Rich Schwerin is speaking next. Laurie, I don't remember what years, close to 10 years ago, Laurie connected me to Rich on Twitter. Even though we lived like miles apart from each other, we hadn't known each other. But Laurie, and maybe we'll have to dig up the tweet, was like, you two should know each other, and tagged us. And it was so wonderful because Rich is now, Laurie's a great friend, and Rich is such a close friend. And we're kind of co-organizers of this meetup. So it's just fascinating, I appreciate that we were introduced on Twitter, and I won't go into the deep history of the meetup, but essentially Rich and I both were involved in launching this meetup. If you're on meetup.com, just search for Bay Area Content Marketing. We do have a Twitter handle, it's content_meetup. So one thing I would recommend is for organizations, like for these nonprofit groups like meetups, it's been useful for us to promote our meetups using Twitter. And then back to, sorry for the long-winded answer, Laurie, but back to the question of how do I use Meetup? Twitter. I think of Twitter as a big personal branding vehicle, and I like to share content. I think of Twitter as three things: read, write, and engage. Read is like when you're scrolling through the feed. Write is when you're sharing links, and engage is when you're being social on social. I've had different mixes over the years. I think I did a lot of writing, meaning I actually did automate and schedule post tweets. Like I'd queue up 50 tweets for the next week. I don't do that anymore because as Laurie said, I don't like to automate anymore. So I will occasionally share a link, but I like to write up like the reason I'm sharing this link. And mostly these days I check Twitter to engage. So I participate in Twitter chats. I look for people to respond to. I just love to connect and like chat with people. And the dad joke reference that Laurie mentioned is that I have a pretty bad sense of humor with puns and jokes. I think I'm funny, but they are dad jokes because I am a dad. So I'll occasionally use Twitter to share my dad joke talent, quote unquote talent, with the world. So there you go.
Dennis, thanks so much.
Amazing. Before we take on the next person, let's do a quick poll to see what you all think of this question. Thanks to NASA Magic, the Mars rover is tweeting from Mars. Guess how many Twitter followers at NASA Persevere has? So let's see. We've got answers coming in now. Oh, interestingly, it looks like some people are guessing right. We'll give it another few seconds. We're about 73% of the poll. May have to poke a few people to wake them up if they're still here. Oh, good. More people are coming in. That's great. I love when that technique works. We're going to count down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and the poll, share the results. You are all correct. At least, when we do the aggregate here, 3 million was the answer according to my notes from Laurie. I am by no means the expert. So now back to Laurie.
Thank you. Rich, that was great. And next we're going to, wait a minute, that was Dennis. Next we're going to have Rich. And by the way, my mother is the original connector, and she's not on Twitter, but she is here on this call. Thanks, Mom. And I connected Dennis and Rich because they were each doing meetups in the Bay Area. And I thought, like, come on, guys, like, go to the same joint, you know? Anyway, Rich is just a wonderful person now. He happens to be the spouse of a friend of a friend. how I met him. But he quickly changed from spouse of a friend to good buddy, very solid guy. And Rich, he's among the most generous retweeters I know.
Oh, please.
It's true. And we need more people like that. And Rich, here's a tougher question for you. You worked for all these big, very big tech companies.
Yeah.
How have you handled having a personal brand, personal account?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thanks for the opportunity to join your book launch. Congrats on the new book, Laurie. So I got on Twitter back when I was the director of social at Oracle. And that was a time where Oracle Legal had verboten on any sort of personal tweeting. Like you could not tweet about Oracle. And so we worked with Altimeter Group and Charlene Lee to do a little change management to bring Oracle Legal along to say, look, our absence on Twitter would be conspicuous. As individuals, if you listen to the Edelman Trust Barometer each year, you're more likely to trust an individual than a corporation. And so it was actually partnering with and staying close with, in large corporations, legal and PR. You want them on your side, right? And this is a while ago. This is 12, 15 years ago. But I think really it's an opportunity for me to be authentically me. I remember, Laurie, there was a time when you had two handles, LK here and LK there. And I remember thinking, how do you do it? Like I just have my one handle, Green Cognito, always have. And it's a smattering of content marketing, content strategy, mountain biking, and photos from my travels. But, it's don't tweet anything that you wouldn't be comfortable having on the front page of the newspaper. There's some common sense here involved. And so I tend to use it as a note-taking reminder to self, because I will always refer back to, I think I tweeted that. And it's great to see some of the engagement, some of the dialogue that happened, and especially you introducing me to Dennis.
Oh, well, my guests are even more amazing than I. So thank you. Good people too. Okay, well, last but not least, we have Nico Gonzalez. And today is the first time we've met face to face. I know him from Twitter. And I have him as an example in chapter 3, where I get into the art of the tweet and retweet. And I thought he had just a really engaging tweet, believe it or not, back in December 2019. And I'm going to read it to you really briefly. And again, I didn't know him from Adam, right? It just happened to, you see good stuff if you follow good people, because you probably have some good people in common. Anyway, he wrote, and this was something I'd never heard of, okay? He wrote, starting tomorrow, tens of thousands of amazing humans will count birds all across the Western Hemisphere. It's a winter tradition, 120 years in the making, and I love each and every champion who participates. And then he had a link to Audubon. And I thought, like, wow, how cool that instead of saying, hello, we're desperate for volunteers at my organization, he wrote this beautiful, engaging tweet. And I thought, like, what a great guy. So now I follow him. And again, we've never talked live until like an hour ago, but I feel like I know him a little bit. I know he got a new t-shirt, went to the beach when the news got rough last week. But tell us, and Nico, you had a great question about what, and I'd love to hear you answer it. What would you tell new people on Twitter to think about when they're starting an account?
Well, thank you, Laurie, for having me here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And the tweet that Laurie read is a reference to Audubon's Christmas bird count. And for those who may be wondering about that, I work for the National Audubon Society on their communications team. But what I would tell myself day one, and I joined Twitter, probably 2 or 3 years after it began, when I was a senior in college. And I kind of just joined to do the really dumb, hey, this is what I'm doing today. This is what I did. And I would tell myself to kind of explore the functionalities of it, what it offers kind of as far as really helping keep you organized. Things like the list function, where you don't even have to follow the person. You can just kind of add them to a list, whether it's personal or public, that you create, and you can you can create a list for certain subject matter experts, other business leaders that you like, comedians, athletes, anyone who's on Twitter, you can add them to any one or more lists. And then, that kind of can help organize the feed of tweets that are up here in your timeline. There's also a lot of other kind of third-party Twitter applications that can help you do that. But that's a function that's in the original Twitter kind of system. And then I really love how someone described Twitter as a party. It is exactly that. It's a great networking opportunity. You don't go to a party and you just start spouting what you do, and spamming people with information. That's annoying and not really normal. You would kind of go and you listen first, you kind of find the conversation that makes sense for you to join. And then you listen, you engage, you kind of share relevant things to say. And then that's how you get to know people, build your brand, meet subject matter experts that are relevant to your industry, that you can then kind of be connected to, elevate. And then, if you go to a party with someone like a subject matter expert from what I do at Audubon is I elevate our scientists. We have a lot of scientists, biologists, ecologists, conservationists, and I'm dragging as many of them as I can onto Twitter with their personal accounts to kind of elevate them among bird Twitter and science Twitter and biology Twitter, to kind of really kind of engage other scientists, conservationists, and journalists. There's a ton of journalists on Twitter who would be interested in knowing who they are. So kind of the utility of Twitter is what I would tell myself on day one, that kind of as a kind of marketability and professional development. It's not just for jokes and memes. It can be really helpful for your career.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you. Thanks for being here. Wow. Thank you, guests. I'm passing it back over to Robbie.
But Laurie can help you develop a strategy for how you're going to take the content you're probably already creating and then share it through Twitter. And so I want to encourage that if you are a content creator in any form or fashion, you're trying to figure out how to raise the visibility for your brand, yes, get a copy of the book, but also think about getting on that bonus content and then hitting reply to her email so you can get on her calendar for that 20-minute conversation, which will probably illuminate the path forward. And if it makes sense, you can then work directly one-on-one with Laurie to help develop something for your organization.
Robbie, you've been a wonderful MC. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. Really, 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 really appreciate it.